Hello and welcome to tonight's presentation of Bookends with Zibby Owens. I'm Rebecca Roberts. I'm the curator of programming at Planet Word. And I hope you all have had a chance to come to Planet Word. If you're here in the Washington area, we're open Wednesday through Sunday, 10 to 5. If you're elsewhere and you're just visiting us virtually, thank you so much for that support. And if you are already on our mailing list and get our newsletter and follow us on social media, thank you for all of that. If you found out about tonight's program through some other channel and you're not in our orbit yet, head on over to planetwordmuseum.org and sign up for a newsletter or follow us. That's the best way to find out what is going on. And that is enough for me. Let me welcome Zibby Owens to the program. Zibby, you are usually where I'm sitting because among many, many other things, you host the podcast Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, but we're talking tonight about your brand new memoir, which just came out July 1st. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This is so much fun.
It must be a little weird to be the interviewee after years of being the interviewer.
It is, I have to say. I prefer interviewing to being interviewed, although you're doing a fine job. So.
Oh, thank you. Well, also, you wrote a memoir, so you wrote something very personal that is very honest. And so not only are you being interviewed, but it's not like being interviewed about a book about Abraham Lincoln, right? Like it is
yes,
very much your story. Do you feel sort of exposed? How are you feeling one weekend?
It is definitely a lot harder to talk about Bookends than, say, my children's book, Princess Charming. I was like, oh, I've got this down. This is about a girl who doesn't give up. And I had 2 anthologies that came out. And before that, those were all very easy to talk about. I could do that night and day. This is like, well, it's my life. And then when people say things like, oh, it was amazing, I read it in like a night. It was such a quick read. It's great. I was like, that was like, it took me my whole life to live all that. And like you've consumed it as entertainment in an evening. That's crazy to me. But yes, I'm glad for that. It's so nice to have readers getting in touch, and it's a dream come true. It really is. But very different, very different.
So in addition to you being a writer and supporter of authors and therefore, completely a supporter of Planet Word, one of the things that was appealing to us about this memoir is that you really sort of mark your life with books. Enormously avid reader. And there are times it seems when you sort of look for a book that's reflecting what you're going through in your life. And there are times when you look for a book to escape what you're going through in your life. Do you have patterns for that?
It's not as intentionally thought out. Now that I've had a chance to look back on many of the things I've read, and by the way, I forgot so many books. I mean, I've read many, many more than I included in the book, but yeah, it makes me think. I mean, I could have told you immediately if you had asked like, what type of book do you like? I really love stories of people getting through something. I find that very inspiring. It doesn't have to be what I'm going through, but if I'm going through a period in my life of grief or helping someone through their illness, if somebody's climbed a mountain, I'm in. Like that helps me. So it doesn't have to be in the same category, but it has to evoke the same reaction and motivation and inspiration. I've always loved those. I don't intentionally seek those out, but I seem to always have them around and find them. So that's how the mind works. We could delve into my subconscious, but I won't. I've revealed enough. Yeah, but no, books for me, I mean, I wrote in Bookends, but starting with Charlotte's Web, which I remember reading as if it was yesterday, and I was really crying. I had tears like falling on the pages, and I was 8 or 9 years old, and I was like, wow, books can really make you feel like this, like it's pieces of paper, and yet it changes my whole system, my whole body and my mind and mood and everything. And I was really hooked after that. And I love to write. It inspired me to start writing from a really young age. And yeah, I feel deeply indebted to books and language. As a shy child, I've had the opportunity to really study conversation and analyze language and wonder at times in my life, how are they just stringing all these sentences together and knowing when to jump in? And that's ended up being a benefit now, as a writer and doing the memoir and writing a novel and all this stuff, but that was not so fun. But anyway, language and a museum devoted to words and language, something I think about all the time, is so amazingly wonderful.
it's interesting. It was interesting to me reading about that part of your childhood when you were so shy as to find it hard to speak sometimes. And as someone who has never been accused of being shy or finding it hard to speak, it wasn't that you didn't have this rich interior life or words going on. It wasn't that you weren't literate or fluent in the language. It was the actual production of the language that sort of stumbled you. And it seems that writing, the way your brain works or worked then, writing was the better way to express yourself.
Yes. I think it was this deep anxiety or something. I don't know. I should probably now consult somebody about this. But yeah, writing has always been this immediate outflow, like it's pouring out of my fingertips. And that's why I do it so quickly. People are always like, how do you write this? And I'll write a whole essay about, I don't even know, whatever. And I wrote this essay recently about these set of napkin rings that my mom has that she pulls out every summer. And they're these little fish. I don't know where she got them, but she's always like, Zib, remember these napkin rings? I'm like, well, of course, you use them every summer. But I realized, I joked to my daughter the last time we were there. And of course she said the same thing. And I was like, if I was in a writing class and there was an assignment, like write about an object that has meaning, I would probably pick these napkin rings. And so my daughter was like, write it, Mom. And I'm like, no, I don't need to write it. I was just, making an observation. She's like, I want to read that. So finally, finally I wrote it. And then I read it out loud to my brother, who obviously through my mother has spent many meals with these napkin rings. And he's like, oh, how long did that take to write? A couple of days or a few weeks or something. And I was like, no, I just did it for an hour before I came over here tonight. So for me, it all comes out. I mean, I edit as I go, but it comes out very organized and coherent and much better perhaps than the way I speak. Although I've had a lot of practice the last 4 years doing the podcast and getting better at that. And that's another thing I've really learned about reading and writing and all that is that these are not fixed skills. Like you can actually increase how quickly you read. My reading pace is faster. My writing pace is faster. I'm a better writer now than I was 1,000 books ago. So all these things are in our control to improve upon.
Well, I also suspect, given that you do a lot of listening and a lot of interviewing and a lot of observing others, that you're kind of writing in your head all the time,
Yes.
That when you actually sit down to the computer, you're typing.
By the time I sit down to the computer, it's like exploding out of my brain. Like I've been turning it over and then it's like ready to go. And then it comes out, but it's been sort of, yeah. My husband is the same way, but he's not a writer. So he just like saves all these up and then like late at night, they all come out and we're like hysterically laughing as I listen to his whole thing, but people have different ways of getting their interior monologues out.
And I mean, regardless of what you're writing, I think there are some writing teachers or coaches who give you the advice of, just throw a first draft out there. It can be terrible. Just put something on the page so that you can edit and edit and edit and edit. And that's super not the way I write. It doesn't sound like that's the way you write either. That like, I kind of like my first draft most of the time, because I've been thinking about it. I've been writing in the shower. I've been writing out on a run. I've been writing during my commute. I just haven't been actually typing it.
I will say at first, I used to really push back and be upset about having to shrink the word count. Like if I wrote like a 1,500 word essay, I'm like, but I need all those words. I know your limit is 1,000 words, but I promise you need my extra 500 words. But now across the board, I've realized when you cut words, you make things better.
Uh-huh.
Like it's always better. And even in my memoir, I cut 30,000 words in like the last weekend and it's better for that. And my mom's like, I didn't even miss anything. So, yeah, I mostly have it pretty well written before it comes out, but I do like to tweak, but not for too long. I don't obsess about each word.
Well, given all the different formats you write in, children's books, memoir, articles, blog posts, are you a different writer depending on the medium?
No, I think I have my voice. I can do a lot of different things. And I've tried like super literary. Like I wrote a whole book trying that out, like first present tense, first person. I walk into the room and the things sway, and it wasn't bad. I wrote a prose poem, like a whole book. I like to try things. I find that really fun. So I can do it, but I'm not particularly gifted at it, right? The best I can do is sort of be myself. So I can infuse that in a children's book or in a blog post or in a memoir. I'm working on a novel now, and I'm like, I just want to have fun with all of this, right? So yes, I can do the different styles, but I find the more I try hard to do something outside of my comfort zone in a way, it's not as authentic, and then it's not really as good, right? If I try to be somebody else has already done that really well. I might as well do me.
How does the novel feel? That's new for you.
It is and it isn't, in that I've written several unpublished, more than I would admit publicly, perhaps, novels. So I have tried it before. This one feels different to me, I guess, because I have a contract for it. So I know I have to finish. And but my editor is so great. So unlike when I've written novels before, toiling away alone, my editor who edited my memoir, Carmen Johnson, like I sent her the first 7,500 words and she's like, how about you go off? What if you do this and that? And I'm like, oh yeah. And then I quickly go back and I go off in that direction. And I'm like, oh yeah, that I do like that. And then I go in a new direction. So I really love this collaborative element that I have, stops, like little like water stations along the way, which keep me going.
And in terms of reading, because you host Moms Don't Have Time to Read books every single day. Mm-hmm. So that's just a big old stack of books to get through. Are you a hour at a time, 10 pages before you fall asleep? What kind of a reader are you?
It depends if I'm cramming for a podcast the next day or not, which I usually am because they're always coming up. If I had my druthers, my favorite way to read is to read a book start to finish.
Really?
Yeah, I love doing that. I end up getting pieces over time for a lot of books, but I remember reading The Vanishing Half, and it was a weekend. I'm divorced and remarried, and I didn't have my kids, and I didn't have as much going on, so I could afford to take the whole day to like languish on the couch and just enjoy the book. But I started at like 10 in the morning, and I was still there when the sun went down, and my husband had to turn on the lights, and I was like, no, this is so good. I can't move until I finish. I did that with this book, Montauk. I love just reading straight through and seeing like it's very different than its and bits. And
yes.
Also my memory is not the best. So I have to like go back when I pick it up and like read the last 10 pages, catch myself up. Where was I? What was happening? Which book is this? So I'd rather read most of it at a stretch at one time.
If you spend that like concentrated long time with a book, especially something as narratively rich as Vanishing Half, do you have a little reentry problem? Like when you stand up from the couch, do you sort of have to remember where you are and who you're talking to? And
yeah, well, that's why, sometimes I literally have to tell my husband, I'm like, I know it looks like I'm just sitting on the couch, but actually here's where I've been. Mm-hmm. And I tell him like, this happened, and then that, and then this, and then I was there, and then I was crying. And then to an observer, reading a book looks so passive, but it's the most active thing you can do intellectually, really. But trouble with reentry, I think I just finished and I'm so moved and excited I have to talk about it, and then that's why it's so perfect. I've set this up this way, so I now read it very soon, like right before I'm talking to the author. So whereas when I was a kid, I used to like write fan mail to authors, and maybe a few months later I would hear back. Now I'm DMing authors like, oh my gosh, I just finished. This is amazing. I can't wait to talk to you. Wow. And they write back. It's the coolest thing. It's the coolest thing.
Well, also because Bookends was a first reads on Amazon, you've already been getting feedback. I mean, that's the other thing about like, in a traditional model, you put a book out into the world and sort of wonder what people make of it, but you've actually gotten some pretty real-time reaction.
I did. I know. It was like training wheels on the launch of this book. And it's good too, because I had so many emotions about it coming out. And I think I got rid of all of those early so that when it actually came out July 1st, I had like processed all that, and I was just ready to celebrate and have fun. But it's it's emotional. It's all this private stuff. And some of the stuff in the book, I really never talked to anybody about until, well, now with everybody. But it's been wonderful. I mean, as I said, I really love to get in touch with authors now. So I put an email address in the back of the book, and I was like, if you liked this book, I mean, don't write me if you hated it, please. Although that has happened, not in an email, but in a post. And I was just like, thank you. Don't tag me if you don't like it. But I've really gotten these wonderful, heartfelt messages. And my dad was just asking me, and I know he's a big supporter of Planet Word and all of that. And he's like, how's the book doing? What's going on with the sales? And he's like very like numbers driven and all that. And is it a success? And I was like, well, it's a success. It is selling well, but it's a success to me because I'm reaching all these readers and I'm inspiring them to like maybe pick up that book they were working on or try this thing that they were thinking about in their lives or whatever. And I'm moving people, and people are like really grateful and excited, and I'm making them laugh and cry. And that is a success for me, bar none.
Well, I was going to ask you why make yourself so vulnerable? Why write a memoir? You don't have to. But I think you just answered that question. That's why. Yeah.
I've always wanted to. I love reading memoirs. I've read so many. I could just sit and read memoirs the rest of my life. I really would be very happy. Like maybe with some food and okay, fine, my kids and stuff.
If I must.
if they want to come in and snuggle or something. I've always wanted to write it. I felt really compelled to share some of these stories, especially some of the losses, the trauma of 9/11 that I went through with losing my best friend, and just some of the things, even about getting through those sort of dark days of early motherhood and falling in love again at 40 and thinking your life was going a certain way and feeling like, okay, this is life, and realizing, you know what? Life is never, this is life. Like every day you have the chance to turn the direction a little bit. Maybe it's little, maybe it's a lot, but I don't know. I find that so important to share, especially as, so many people have gone through loss, especially now. I mean, now I'm 45 and I went through a lot in my 20s, but you get this awareness like, wait, I get it. Like, this is not going to last forever, at all. Do other people know that? Right. So I feel like part of why I wanted to write it is just like, if you knew that, would you live the way you're living? So I just want people to know what I know, having lost people so close to me. And not to say, I don't claim that my loss is any greater, whatever. It's not about the grief or the loss. It's just the awareness of how finite it all is. And I think that's part of my whole brand. Moms don't have time to read books. Moms don't have this new content site. Moms don't have time to, and moms don't have time to grieve. Moms don't have time to this. And it's funny, but it's also true. I mean, we don't have infinite amount of time. So we might as well make the most of it.
This is sort of an awkward phrase, but New York Magazine called you a bookfluencer, which everyone gets to play with the language however they want. We're all for it at Planet Word, but bookfluencer, I'm trippingly off the tongue. In the sense that you match people with books. It's something you take some pride in, and exploring authors that might not get exposure otherwise. Do you, after hundreds of author interviews, do you find sort of patterns in writing style or in backstories or in something that makes you come back to again and again, where you feel confident recommending a certain sort of writer or a certain sort of book, or do you just try to match it to the personality of the person asking?
For a little while back in the beginning, I was doing this thing where if you subscribe to my newsletter, I'd give you personalized book recommendations.
Ooh.
But then I went on CBS this morning and like, I got so many emails asking me for book. I don't think I ever respond. There's so many. So, I was like, this is not a scalable, like,
yeah.
idea. But I learned so much from doing that. Because I probably did do that a couple hundred times, and I learned about what people were reading. It actually informed some of the programming for my own podcast, because I realized how many more people really love thrillers or mysteries or some sort of escape. That's not my go-to genre, but I was like, okay, I should probably have more thriller authors on, or more mystery, people like that a lot. So I'll have more on, so I can, and I want to be more informed of the genre so I can recommend the good ones, or the ones that I think are really strong. In terms of commonalities, I mean, each book is so unique, but of course there are structural things that I notice, like things I like, things I don't like. How are they doing it? Like, I didn't analyze books in the same way starting out. I mean, I took classes and blah, 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 but I'm very aware. Are we shifting perspectives? Is every chapter from a different point of view? Do I like that? We just had a submission for Zibby Books, and because I run this publishing company now, which is taking up a lot of time. And one submission, they were changing point of view within a chapter, and I was just like, ooh, I want to stay with her. Like, could I please stay with her? Like, it's like somebody let me off at a bus stop when I wanted to keep riding that bus. So I prefer to sort of stay with a character. Sometimes it can be really effective, but that's just my own. I'd like to just like be someone else and keep going. In terms of authors, I have found the most common thing is authors having an anxiety disorder, which makes me feel like I found my people, right? Like, all our brains are just a little bit the same in some ways, in a way that I thought was sort of unique to me. And I realized, oh, this is just a pattern that so many people share. So I've learned how common rejection is. And I know that's trite, but hearing hundreds of really talented authors talk about being rejected, and now also being a publisher, I realize rejection from a publishing house can have absolutely nothing to do with talent or the book. It's like such a narrow vision, what you're looking for, what you have available right then, what you've already bought, what's good with the rest of the list. Like, there's so many factors. So I feel better about all my past rejections now. But no, if somebody asks me for a book, I would like to ask them a bunch of questions. And then I also like to go through, sometimes I don't have it top of mind. Like, I have to be like, oh yeah, right. Like, what podcasts have I done? So I refer regularly to like all the headshots of people or all the transcripts. And I'm like, oh, she would love that. Like, that would be good. But I can't always pull it out of like a rabbit from a hat.
Well, every day. You are doing this every day. Like, yeah. It's a lot. I completely lost my train of thought, but I will come back to it. The idea that all writers have an anxiety disorder, I think
not all,
but no, but yes, most. I wonder what that's about, right? Like, is it that it's a chicken and egg question? Are you anxious about the world so you turn to the written page to sort your thoughts, or are you the kind of person who creates interesting stories because your brain works a little bit differently? Or are writers just sort of introverted by nature and awkward socially because they're not public speakers or, Broadway stars or something else creative? It's an interesting question to ponder.
I mean, I think that what we were talking about earlier with this interior monologue, and sort of by the time you write, you already know it because you've been thinking about it.
Yeah.
I don't know that, and I don't mean to make light of an anxiety disorder. Maybe it's just anxiety, not a disorder, but being anxious, but it's this whole what if. I mean, that is fiction. What if this happened? What if that happened? That is what anxiety is all about.
Yeah.
What if I get hit by a car on my way to this event? Like, what if I die on the way to this place? What if I die in this plane? And people are like, I don't know. But if you say like, what if the person next to me is about to stab me with a knife? I can believe that. I can think that and wonder that. But I could also turn that into a novel, and people would like want to read that. But I don't know. So I think it comes from this, yes, imagination, but this what if instinct is something that it's like people with anxiety do all the time anyway. That's how they see the world a little bit.
That's such an interesting way to look at it, as opposed to, the publishing industry making people neurotic, which is also possible.
I don't think that it's the publishing industry making people neurotic. I think the publishing industry might make people insecure and feel like an imposter or feel like a failure. Not, I'll stop there. But it doesn't create the anxiety that I think that's already there.
A couple of years ago, sort of like 6 months into the pandemic, I was talking to some of the book reviewers for the Washington Post, and they had identified 4 kinds of readers, 4 kinds of pandemic readers in broad strokes. And it was people who were completely leaning into the pandemic and reading about epidemiology and the 1918 flu and just learning everything they possibly could to feel armed and prepared. There were people who were going back to old favorites, rereading classics, seeking comfort in books. There were escapists, big spike in sci-fi, fantasy, alternate universe kind of narratives. And then there were people who just couldn't read, just couldn't do it. It took too much energy and too much attention and too much focused time in a world where people felt like those were in short supply. And maybe because of that 4th group, there was a spike in audiobooks.
Mm-hmm.
Are you an audiobook listener?
Those were interesting categories, by the way. I do listen to audiobooks. I can read like 10 times as quickly, probably more than that. I read so much more quickly that it's a waste of time sometimes, but I do really enjoy audiobooks, especially when I'm driving. Sometimes when I'm like walking across the park, dropping the kids at school. Although I was about to interview somebody and I listened to it, but it's hard to tell when you're listening. There was this whole introduction and I didn't realize it had been written by somebody else. So when I interviewed them, I was asking them about their thoughts and they're like, oh no, that was like the foreword by somebody else. I'm like, oh, well, I couldn't even tell that. But I think especially by memoirists, if they're reading their memoirs. I remember reading Jodi Patterson's The Bold Place, The Bold Thing. Anyway, it was so good. Fabulous book. And she read it. And by the end of it, I was like, oh, we're friends. Of course we're not. So then by the time I got her on Zoom to do I'm like, no, of course I know your voice. I know every inflection. I've listened to it like 10 hours already. So I do think it engenders this intimacy. Not as much, although actually I listened to The Family and I loved listening to The Family by Naomi Krupinski. I listened to that in audiobook, like doing all these hikes. And every time I went, I was like, okay, I'm going to listen to that again. But in general, I read more than I listen.
Yeah.
How about you?
I find that I choose which books I listen. I listen to a ton, same thing when I'm walking the dog or commuting. But I tend to want to listen to like big sweeping multi-generational epics with 5 narrators, that feel theatrical.
Okay.
I'd rather, especially because I read a lot of nonfiction, I'd rather read that because for exactly what you said about memory, like you need to go back sometimes a few pages and remember who a character is, or on second reference what that was. And I'd rather have the book.
Although audio, they're doing really interesting things with audio. Like Malcolm Gladwell's Pushkin Industries, like they're doing really interesting audiobooks where they're using old clips of actual, like in his latest book about wartime, and you could hear the fighter jets in
so there's production around it.
A lot of production, highly produced, and it's more like a movie for your ears.
It's like a throwback to the old radio dramas.
Yeah, it's very cool. It's like I don't know if time stretches to like hear it start to finish. I would rather have it, but it's very cool.
But yeah, getting back to those 4 categories, which I found fascinating as a way of dealing with an unexpected stressor. I think it presupposes that you use books as a way to handle things already, right? I think that we are among company here with Planet Word audience. That is who we're talking about. But I found that fascinating, that especially the people going back to reread things, because I have a few things that I reread regularly. I go back to Jane Eyre every couple of years. I go back to Persuasion every couple of years, but for the most part, I feel like there's just so much to read that it's hard to justify revisiting something.
I do not reread hardly at all. I've reread a couple things lately that I loved 20, 30 years ago. And I'm like, maybe I should just check these books out again. It's been a while. I keep recommending them. Like, what are they? And I realize they don't land the same way now. Still really good, but there was something that I needed then that I got from these books that I don't need in the same way anymore.
Well, you mentioned that in Bookends, that there was Drinking a Love Story, for instance, was a book
Yes,
that
look
you
at
felt
you.
really profound.
I have no original thoughts anymore. This is terrible.
But I think that's really interesting. I mean, I think it's useful to think through what was it about that time in my life that book felt so profound or relevant.
Yep.
And it's not that it's written differently or that you've gotten snotty about that style. It's just not connecting to you on the same level because you're in a different place.
Yeah. Although I did try to get my daughter to reread a book. Like I packed it. We were going some trip or something, and I'm like, you loved this book, and she's like, but I read it already. She's almost 9, and I'm like, no, I know, but you can read it again. And she's like, I like to read books once, and I was like, me too. Like,
Fair.
why am I bringing this book again for her? Like, so anyway, yes.
Are your kids readers?
My youngest is the biggest reader of all. He's always with a book, like walking around in the car today before camp. I mean, it's so cute. It's just the cutest. He like tucked it behind the seat today. And when I got in, he's like, I've waited all of camp and now I can read it again. And he's like, and here it is. I know. I was like, oh, be still, my beating heart.
It's tricky. I have 3 sons, none of whom do a ton of reading for pleasure. And for a long time, I thought that was because I hadn't found the right book for them. I like so much else in parenting, you have to remember it's not about you and your childhood experiences and that they are their own people. But I kept sort of expecting that find that book that like they didn't hear me calling them for dinner because they were in Narnia kind of a thing. And none of them turned out to temperamentally be that guy. They're well-educated, well-read people, but they're not people who turn to books as a form of entertainment. And it's yet one other way your kids are not yourself, but it's funny, I think we carry a book in the Planet Word gift shop called How to Raise a Reader. And I feel like good luck. Like if we could dictate how we raise our kids in so many ways.
I interviewed the authors, Pamela Paul and Marie Russo, of that book. And it's true. There are all these tips and tricks, but ultimately, like so many things, there are some kids much more drawn to it than others. And all you can do is like foster that.
Right. And know that your kid is, like you, I have twins, and I think that's your own little science experiment, right? Where you are who they are. We do have a few questions from the audience, and I encourage you again to put those in the Q&A box. Somebody says, I cannot not finish a book. I feel like I'm not giving the author the deserved chance. How do you feel about that?
That's so nice. That's lovely. I think that if you are reading any of a book, especially if you've bought the book, the author is happy. So do what you can, but keep buying books.
Do you put down books if you feel like they're not doing it for you?
I used to feel really badly about that, but I don't anymore. But I will say, I think it's worth skimming through the rest. Just see where it went, see what you missed. But again, we don't have unlimited time. And if you got something out of the first 50 pages that'll stay with you, or you realize this is not the type of writing you like or whatever, this is not your author, okay, then go find a book that's going to make you stay up at night and excited. I feel like we're all sort of in the hunt. Like you never know when you open a book, it's just the one that's going to keep me up at night, that I'm like going to be so excited about. And so you just keep opening them up and seeing like, what's this one going to do? Like, I feel like that's, at least for me, I'm always like, is this the one where I'm like, I cannot stop reading this?
Right. And that's the amazing anticipation of a new closed book. I actually read a lot on ebooks, so I don't have that like literally cracking the spine feeling, but it's, downloading that new book and you think, right, what is this going to hold for me?
Yeah.
Where am I going to go?
Where am I
What
going
am I
to go?
going to learn? And I think your point is well taken, that even if it's a negative lesson, even if it's sort of like, I can't suspend my disbelief long enough to fly that dragon, or, the magical realism style is, I can't go with it, whatever it is, like that's, you learn something,
Yep.
you learn something about writing and reading. And so it's worth it. Somebody says, I hope you refer people to the public library when they ask for book recommendations. Big supporters of the library here at Planet Word.
I'm a huge supporter of the library. I'm on the Library Council of the New York Public Library. I'm doing Authors Night for the East Hampton Library coming up. I'm doing Fridays at 5 for the Bridgehampton Library. I love libraries. I grew up going to libraries all the time. My mother would take me with a tote bag. You'll know this because you read Bookends, but that's what we did. Like every weekend we went to the library, and I think they are such a gift. It's amazing. From a sales perspective, it's sort of interesting. Like you're trying to sell a product which everyone in the world can get for free. Right? It's interesting. So why do people want to own it?
We do have somebody asking for book recommendations specifically for escapist beach ready kind of things.
My favorite beach read lately is, aside from Bookends, is Nora Goes Off Script by Annabelle Moynihan. I loved it.
I did too.
Did you? Yeah.
She is someone, so her columns, she writes a parenting column that one of them was about being the mother of 3 sons, which I also am. And it was one of those things that people sent around to each other because if you get it about the 3 sons thing, you get it. And so I have followed her for a while as a columnist. And then when I saw she had a novel coming out, I couldn't wait. And actually that's when I listened to an audiobook. And it is delightful.
Yep.
What about some authors we might not know about who you've talked to lately who you think are really interesting?
Good question. Putting me on the spot here. That we might not know about. What did I do this week? Let me look at my calendar. This is what I mean about my memory here. I'm going to go to a random day and tell you somebody that
I did notice scrolling through the episodes for Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, you interview many more female authors than male. Is that intentional?
I do, actually. I don't know. I think it's more where I am with my life, or I don't know. I don't mean to do it, but it just sort of happens. Actually, the episode that's out today, Sylvia Vasquez dash something.
I'll put that in the chat.
Hold on, I'm gonna look it up. In Search of the Mountain.
Sylvia Vasquez Lovato in
Yes.
The Shadow of the Mountain.
It's so good.
Is
so good. It's sad. It's a memoir, but again, I'm love memoirs. She went through a lot in her childhood, and as many people do, but she took that experience. She also went through, grief of a friend in her later life, and has become the most accomplished hiker, climbing all the seven summit mountains. And so she interweaves the climbing with the narrative of her childhood until they both meet up at the end chronologically. It's really good.
Good recommendation.
Yeah, it's really good.
Somebody asked, the way you did the structure of the chapter titles was so unique, both with your title and the title of other books. What's the backstory of how that came to be?
I just thought that would be cool. I was like, this is all about
explain books. How the chapters are.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Yeah. So every chapter is the title of another book. So my table of contents could actually be, I guess, a bibliography of sorts. But, chapter 4 is The Devil Wears Prada, and chapter 11 is Heartburn, and all of them, the titles refer to what's basically going on thematically in the chapter. I did the titles at the end, and was like, okay, what would be a good book to reflect what I ended up putting in this particular chapter? And then at the very end, after I had all the chapter titles done and I had the chapters sorted out where they were, I realized that I had the exact right amount of sections for each one to be labeled a letter in the word bookends. So then I did BOOKENDS as all the parts.
It's like a little secret word puzzle in there.
Yeah, little B, and anyway, I love stuff like that.
You're among friends. It must have been by the time you collected all the titles at the end, you must have been like, oh wait, but I can't forget, right?
There were so many I didn't
your
include.
children, right?
I mean, there are just so many I loved. Then I debated, should I put at the end all the books I'd had on my podcast so far? Which in retrospect now I'm like, maybe I just should have done that. But because I loved all those books too. So and now I feel bad that some authors are not in there. And it's not because I didn't love their books. And there were books that like really affected me deeply that I just forgot to include. So I don't know. I did my best. And then at some point I was like, I have to stop and move on.
Right. It is in fact published and out in the world. You need to stop.
Although the night before it came out, I was like, I think I should refresh my memory of what I even put in here and what's just in my life. And I started reading it and I was like, oh no, I would have done that differently. And I was like, I can't do this. And I had to put it down.
For the podcast with interviewing authors, what are you getting out of that? Why do you keep doing that every day?
I ask myself the same question. I could easily scale back. People are like, why do you do this so much? Why don't you do it 3 times a week? And it's really because I don't want to miss out on any of those conversations. Like you never know what you're going to learn, who you're going to meet. And, similar to a book that like you keep opening, not knowing if this is the one, I feel the same way about authors. Although I explained this to somebody who was thinking very analytically, this girlfriend of mine, about like how many I should do and this and that. And she's like, why do you do so many? And I'm like, well, you just never know. Like, what if it's the best conversation ever and you can't predict it? It's all about like sort of the chemistry of the conversation. And sometimes I get off and I'm like, that was one of the best conversations of my life. But you just don't know, because the next one you could expect to be great and it's fine, but it's nothing special. But then you could really connect to this person who wrote about his Bengali childhood. And next thing you know, you're like crying together. So she's like, you're basically like having 7 blind dates a week. And I'm like, so I just hate to say no to really I say no to tons and tons of people. I have to like the books, or I have to be interested in the book. But I don't know. You just, every no is a missed opportunity to get to know somebody. And that's really hard for me.
Also, I find, and I don't do anywhere near the volume you do, but as someone who also interviews a lot of writers, that there is something you learn about people from what they write. And then there's something entirely different that you learn about them by having a conversation.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yes. And I really, like, I just like to figure something out about them. Like, okay, sometimes I have to be like, let's go back. Where were you born? Like, tell me, like, I have to figure you out. Like I want to make sense of this book in your life and in my life, but right. Because I read it too. So, I get so much satisfaction out of it. I learn, I challenge myself every day. I love the preparation, but I love the conversation. And, I don't report to anyone, right? I can do whatever I want. It's incredibly liberating. So I can ask them anything and I'm not really afraid. I just interviewed this guy. I was talking about this Bengali author, Sopan Deb, and he wrote a new book, like Kaya Reese's Second Act, but he had written a memoir I hadn't read, and he started telling me about it. And next thing you know, I was like, well, like, did you actually feel like your parents loved you? And we had this whole thing about it. Like, and it was like, he clearly hadn't been asked that before. And a lot of people say that, like, oh, I hadn't been asked, because I'm just like, I'm just going to ask. Like, I'm really curious. I'm not trying to put anybody on the defensive. Like this show is designed to help authors. Like, take the floor, go, take the mic, run. But like, I want to know the real deal. I don't waste my time with just like the surface stuff that I could listen to on anybody else's podcast. That's a waste.
Mm-hmm. It's one of the, otherwise just make it a lecture, not a conversation.
Right? Yes. Yes. And you can so tell, like, some authors have been so media trained that they're like pressing play and just like dialing it in. And I'm like, I know you're a big deal, but I don't need this. This doesn't, I could have listened to that somewhere else.
Yeah. I generally think the "what are you working on next" question is terrible when someone has a new book out. It's like, I just did this one, give me a break. But I am going to ask it just because you are someone who has so many things simmering on so many burners at once. You've got a second children's book coming out. Yes.
Eventually a second children's book coming out. I did write it already, but I don't know when they'll publish it. It's another Princess Charming book. I recently sold a memoir. It's coming out in the summer of 2024, provided that I get it in by March as planned, which is questionable. But it's called Blank, and it's about a mom of two who's a writer and lives in Los Angeles. And she's going through some particular personal and professional challenges and comes up with a very unconventional solution to them. So I'm working on that. It's light and funny. And I mean, I think it's funny, so I'll go with that. But I'm also really hard at work launching the books for Zibby Books, the publishing house I started. And we have 12 books coming out next year. And that is a lot of effort and work. And I'm still acquiring books for 2024 and reading submissions and metadata and getting ready for sales conference and like all of pricing and volume. And I'm like, oh my God, what did I get myself into? So that's taking up a lot of my time. And I have a podcast network called Zcast, and I help other people launch shows. And we have my latest show, which is launching soon, is called Moms Don't Have Time to Move and Shake. Because we all need to make more time to move, and I'm definitely shaking a little too much. Different parts of my body. So it's about health and wellness ish. And it has, I put out a call for help on social media when I was like, I want to bring this show out, but I cannot host another show.
Yeah.
Who can help me? And like, I was like, I don't want anybody who's already figured it out. I want people like me who are just like struggling, trying to figure it out one day at a time, who have tried a million things and have a perspective on it. So I've ended up with I was like, you know what? All these submissions sound really great. So I'm having like a community hosted podcast, 30 different hosts.
What a good idea.
Yeah, it's really great. So that's launching very soon. And we already have a couple shows. We are launching Confessions of a Working Actor, which is really interesting. 2 actors interviewing other actors, trying to inspire them to keep going in the way that my podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books, helps aspiring authors keep going. And so there more stuff happening there. And then momsdon'thavetime.com is our new content site, which we have a soft launch up of, but it used to be Moms Don't Have Time to Write on Medium, which was personal essays. We've been doing that publication for over a year. And now I've decided to put it on my own site, and we'll have personal essays and recommendations and some of the things I'm really recommending or obsessed with, from like, a pair of glasses to a book, lots of book content, book reviews, book excerpts, advanced previews of books, writer interviews. So lots of bookish content, but also life. So we have all these different verticals. Moms don't have time to eat and explore. Moms don't have time to read and write. Moms don't have time to shop and party. And so that's been really fun to develop. We have like hundreds of authors who are submitting. So that's amazing. And, my kids, my new puppy. I don't like the rest of, and then my
That's like a bad joke. You took on a new puppy in the middle of
seriously, I don't know why I do these things. I just couldn't stop myself. And then of course I sit there and at 4:30 this morning with like this dog eating my pajamas, and I'm like, why do I make these impulsive decisions? But they're usually good, but not always. So
well, if you want to read about Zibby's impulsive decisions and thoughtful analysis of books, I recommend Bookends. It came out last week. We are selling it through our bookshop.org link at Planet Word, which both gets you the book and supports Planet Word. So if you want to do that, that would be wonderful. And Zibby Owens, thank you so much for spending the last hour with me. It's been a treat.
Oh my gosh, thank you. This has been really fun. You're great at what you do.
Thank you, as are you. Talk to you soon. Good night.
Bye-bye.